a lot about grief can be about regret, which isn't really grief at all. It's regret. My name's Rhyena Halpern. I'm an end-of-life doula. I came to being an end-of-life doula through a very kind of roundabout, interesting way. But what I'm really most passionate about is just opening up the conversation about death to make it a normal thing to talk about. I find that people who lose a loved one and have a lot, they tend, without all the conversations about death and dying, about what their loved one's wishes were, about how they wanted to die, about what they wanted to happen to their body afterwards, about having a sense of completion of life. I find those people have a much harder time with grief and the whole mourning process. And this is really interesting to me because it indicates that a lot about grief is just can be about regret, which isn't really grief at all. It's regret. And so what I think is if we had a healthy conversation about death and dying, if it was normal to talk about advanced care directives and one's wishes at the end of life, that there would be a whole lot less regret and our whole concept about losing someone, grief and loss would just change. And for me, it really changed when my mom died. She was 94 and it was 7 years ago. And my mom was just like ready to die. She felt like she had outlived her usefulness, her purpose. She was watching her body decay and she was ready to go. She was on hospice for a long time, 2.5 years. And she just was ready. And I just kind of watched her embrace death and watched death embrace her. And it was really a very tender, intimate, amazing experience. And it really left me with a lot of gifts. And the big one was that I didn't have grief. I just had love. You know, a lot of people will say, oh my God, it's such a death-denying culture and nobody wants to talk about it. I don't find that to be the case. I find people are really hungry to talk about it. They want to talk about it. It's waiting for all of us. You know, we don't know how long we have. We just know it's there. And I think it's part of our subconscious mind, even our conscious mind, of just this awareness of finite time. And I think it's really unnatural to live in an environment where can't talk about death, all these kind of denial statements that we've gotten used to as a culture are really relatively new. They're not that old. And I think that's part of why you can see the death and dying movement has made so much progress in a shift of consciousness. I mean, hospice has been around since 1970. And so it's 54 years. And, you know, when I grew up, I never heard the word hospice. I don't know anybody who doesn't know the word hospice. You know, it is part of our culture. And you can see, like, in 2010, only 18% of Americans had filled out an advanced care directive. Now, as of 2020, that number went to almost 30%. And, you know, what I'm excited about is getting that number to 100%. And what I want to see is just it being completely normal. Advanced care directives should be part of these kind of young adult steps into adulthood. It should be just normal every 10 years or so to look over your advanced care directive and maybe update it. So to me, normal conversations, being death positive in our culture just means that we're not avoiding it, we're not denying it. We can talk about it comfortably. We can embrace the need for advanced care directives. And then we can do things like have an end-of-life doula, such as myself, help out when needed. You know, one of my other visions besides advanced care directives for everybody after 18 is for everybody just had an end-of-life doula, you know, somebody that they knew they could go to when they were either dealing with a terminal illness or, aging in themselves or a loved one, that they could just go to, that they had like some established relationship. There was trust there. They had worked out some end of life plans about wishes and desires and needs and tasks to do. And then you don't call them for a year or two, and then you need them. And then you don't call them for a year or two, and then you need them. Like, to just be an integrated part of life. I've been doing these online death cafes for the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross Foundation and for Mission Hospice for 4 years. And what I love is people just kind of showing up. They heard about a death cafe. They've never been. They're kind of curious. They kind of know that they need to do something like advanced care directive or a will, and they just come. And then they kind of like it, and they come again. I can say that, and there's just like a small cohort of us who've been around the whole 4 years. We all agree, like, the big takeaway is we're less afraid of dying. That we're more comfortable, of course, talking about death, but less afraid of dying. And so I feel like these death cafes were really designed to just normalize talking about death by having over conversation and tea and cake. That was their original intention. You have things like death cafes you can go to. Then you have, hopefully through healthcare, you're being asked to think about your advanced care directive. Then there's a lot of books, and there's a lot of films, and more all the time, which is another indication, that the culture is reaching towards a tipping point about death awareness, death positivity, conscious dying, is that the culture, the books, the films, the articles, the podcasts, that you hear more and more stories about it. And so it just becomes much more accessible. And then last but not least is death itself. And that's what happens is we come close to death. We might have a beloved pet die or grandparent die or parent or sibling. We go through a profound experience. And I think making it through and having the gift of some time to really reflect and contemplate the lessons learned with the kind of extraordinary and ordinary experience of a loved one dying is just something that is just a game changer. Well, a lot of doulas, became doulas because of a personal experience they had with loss, where they were very, very involved in caretaking and helping the person usher them towards death. And that's what being a death doula is about, is it's really about being that companion, that support to the person who's dying and their loved ones. But I think that that experience is so profound. It really changes people, it moves people, and it really does help you get over your fear of death. One of the most important standards for being a doula is something that I think isn't always easy for everybody that is drawn to the profession. And that is that as doulas, what we're doing is we're really listening. We're really inquiring to find out what the person who's dying, what the family wants for their death. And we might not want that for them or for ourselves. So we have to have the ability to put aside our own ego, our own beliefs, and really be there to serve their interests. It's not so much about what we believe. It's really about our belief in being there for the person on their terms and making sure we fully understand that. So it's a lot about deep deep listening, deep inquiry, and then helping the person get what they want. There's like doulas coming in a couple months when the person knows that they're facing death, and they're helping at that point to provide companioning and support. And that is probably more typical. Then there's doulas who work with medical aid in dying. And we're coming in at the very end. So it could be the last week of a person's life, and then, of course, the last day of the person's life. Then there's some doulas who really focus on the active dying phase, which can be, let's just say, between 2 days and 2 weeks, and then staying with the family and the body for a home funeral, and really having, a complete home death experience. And then, of course, some doulas are involved with helping as celebrants with the funeral or the memorial, or some work afterwards on grief or post-death support. So it's just a really wide range. And I think that's also what's interesting about being a doula, is you can either find your niche, or you can do it all and just have a whole lot of variety. It really just depends on what you feel called for. So to me, for myself, my strongest interest is I think ideal is a year or two before death to develop a relationship with the client and their people, to have that trust and the rapport. One of my favorite clients I was with him for about a year before he died, and he had all this artwork, and he wanted to think through what was going to happen to that. He had 1,000 poems, and he wanted to cull them to the top 100 to leave his best poems for his kids in a little book. And I just happened to have a lot of skills as an editor, so we worked on that project. And then, he had this bucket list of 5 things he wanted to do. It were mostly travel related. And we got him on 4 out of 5 of those. Then he had some repair with some people close in his life that he wanted to do. And we worked on some letters. Then he did some videos to say goodbye to some of his siblings. So, we had this time to do all of this end-of-life preparation, planning, and action. And then when he brought hospice in, he wanted me to be coordinating closely with the hospice nurse. And we communicated a lot. And I think it really helped his care because, hospice nurses can only be there a short amount of time, and doulas, we can be there a long amount of time. And so we might know stuff that information that can help the hospice nurse, especially with palliative care and medication. By then, when he was, a week away from dying, I was very close with his kids. He had a large family of siblings. I knew all of his siblings, and it was all what he wanted. He wanted me to be there, to know them, so if they needed support, they could come to me, while he was living, while they were anticipating his death, but also after his death. And I'm still in touch. So to me, that's the ideal client that I would love to have. But, I also appreciate, anybody who wants to kind of embrace death consciously, whatever that means to them. I always read poems, and, sometimes there's just incredible meditation to do that addresses all of this. And I think it's quite profound and meaningful. And certainly, here's one that I just read today by Henry David Thoreau. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life. and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. And this is a thought that we see in so many cultural traditions, right? This whole idea of living fully. I mean, whether it's Henry David Thoreau, Bhutan, Buddhism, a lot of American New Age consciousness seeking awareness. This is about like living fully. And that's what, if we really can normalize talking about death, face it with some awareness, some intentionality, and let go of the fear and the denial of it, we will live more fully. And when our time comes, we will be able to leave, move on with peace.